When the power of steam was king, ruling the industrial onslaught of the 1800s, Australia was as much engulfed in a development craze as Europe and America. Although on the other side of the world, this colony quickly became swept up in the frenzy of creating a spiderweb of iron rails all over the country. Still an outpost of the mother country, Australian railways were as strongly influenced by England as was the rest of our daily lives. The design for most of our locomotives was distinctly English, and despite local workshops churning out large numbers, many hundreds of our engines were built over there and shipped out as fully assembled deck cargo. In the far southern corner of Australia, Alistair Matheson is a gentleman who wants to reverse this process, just once.
This is the first time that an Australian-built locomotive has ever been taken to the United Kingdom.
An excellent way to view the extent of English influence on our culture is a visit to Tasmania. With similarities in geography and climate, the architecture here simply completes the picture. In his own little pocket of this island state, about as far away from the equator as one can get in Australia, Alistair Matheson built a working old-style timber mill in 1979. Symbolic of one of the country's most prolific industries, it's typical of hundreds of such mills which were once dotted throughout the Australian bush. In 1986, Alistair somehow found himself up to his knees building an ambitious extension to his mill, a narrow-gauge steam railway inspired from one photograph.
English aristocrat and railway engineer Sir Arthur Hayward started it all off by developing this 15-inch gauge system, and it was a photograph from his original railway given to me by my 8-year-old daughter in a book one year for Christmas that inspired me to build what is now the Bushmill Railway. Once we had created the Bushmill, I felt that we had to go on to a further stage, and I wanted to put, because of my interest in steam and steam railways generally, I would have loved to have put in a railway. But because of the terrain, it was virtually impossible to do that. And it was Sir Arthur Hayward's vision that he had back in the early 1870s. And he achieved it. He got these little railways up through remarkable gradients and around very, very tight curves. And as soon as I saw the photograph, I knew straight away, why can't we do this? About 12 months after we finished our railway, I was in England and I accidentally came across a book which was a printed edition of Sir Arthur Hayward's original diary about his railways. And in the back of that edition were some superb glass plate photographs of the railway that he had built himself back in the 1870s at Duffield Bank. And when I looked at those photographs, I just could not believe what I was seeing, because without previous knowledge, our railways were just so similar, and it really took my breath away when I saw the photographs. Perhaps there was some unfinished business that he had to attend to.
Sir Arthur Hayward was an intelligent and creative engineer who endured the quaint frustration of being both ahead of the times and behind them all at once. In the latter half of the 1800s, he devoted his work to what became known as minimum gauge railways, where he could see the benefit in small, cheaper, easier to handle construction. 15-inch gauge, he contended, was big enough to handle heavy loads, but small enough to be operated by one man. It was also capable of negotiating very steep gradients and tight curves. Sir Arthur had a vision of developing his estate railways, tiny private lines which would link the farming land of the manors with a full-size railway network and their connected markets. But he only ever completed two, one for himself and another for his good friend, the Duke of Westminster. Hayward's unique and distinctive engineering concepts were considered too revolutionary to be accepted then. By the time enough influential people were taking notice of his ideas, roads and motor lorries had captured the transport limelight, effectively eliminating the need for this type of railway. His life's work was already obsolete. However, Hayward's essential belief in narrow gauge did take hold all over the world. Small railways of all shapes and sizes played a vital role in the relentless spread of transport services. In Victoria, another of Australia's premier tourist attractions, Puffing Billy, is a living revival of an actual narrow gauge railway. At the turn of the century, local activity was centred around the train, and the humble station master was a highly placed community member. Now, nearly 250,000 passengers a year continue the long-standing tradition of riding on Puffing Billy through the Dandenong Ranges.
We're really looking at getting onto the map in the railway world.
The local media muse over whether this is the antic of an enthusiast, an entrepreneur, or a bit of a crackpot.
It'll certainly put us and Tasmania in this locomotive.
It's all come together, 6 months of organising, raising finance, finding a ship. Now it's actually happening. Ahead of the locomotive is 6 weeks at sea, and tomorrow the first step in that journey begins. It's a fairly safe bet that no matter how far ahead work begins, there's always going to be a bag full of jobs to do on the last night. While taking a complete steam engine to England may be outside the limits of hand luggage, with modern transport systems, it's actually not as difficult as may first appear. After the initial, "You're going to what?" from bystanders, a common question centred around whether the container had been specially built for the task, and the answer was no. A standard ANL 20-footer had a simple frame set up to act as rails placed on the floor. Once inside, the locomotive would simply be pinned to this frame with a brace at the front and back. The shipping container has revolutionised freight handling. Loading this cargo is like pointing a kid's train set into a shoebox. The ship's taking its cargo about as far away from Australia as you can go, literally to the other side of the world. Once on English soil, the great little train from down under will tour two of the country's famous 15-inch gauge railways, the Ravenglass and Eskdale in the north and the Romney Hythe and Dymchurch down on the southeast corner.
We needed a bigger, more powerful locomotive that was suited to our very steep gradients and our very tight curves on the track.
The particular locomotive that's been chosen to be bundled off to England has a strong personal attachment for everyone at the Bush Mill, particularly as it was hand-built at the mill. Co-owner and driver Lester Jones is the man responsible for the engine's construction. There are very few off-the-shelf items for making steam engines these days, so virtually everything had to be scratch-built from raw materials.
99% of it is handmade. The boiler was built by a local boiler maker in Hobart, but all the motions, the parts, the wheels and everything are all handcrafted.
Gradually, all the bits and pieces needed began to be churned out from inside the tiny workshop, aided only by a handful of basic tools. The quality of work was exceptional, further enhanced when you know that Lester had no formal engineering qualifications.
I commenced the engine in November 1987, and after 3 years of building, we commissioned it on the 12th of December in 1990.
The engine actually has its own particular significance in railway history, being a half-size replica of another famous locomotive.
It's the only one of its kind in the world. The very first Garratt built in the world was built for the Tasmanian Government Railways back in the early 1900s.
Few places have better shown the conflict between preservation of nature and the onslaught of industry as Tasmania's west coast. A wilderness of unmatched beauty, last century it derived a reputation for having one of the richest sources of mineral deposits in the world. The exploitation of that resource is well documented, and the controversy over its effect continues today. But whatever the ethical or ecological issues, the story of how that mineral source was able to be plundered in such harsh surroundings is indeed remarkable. Mining took hold with all the tenacity associated with this wild industry. Courage and perseverance were the keys to success. Large complexes shared the mountains with tiny one-man diggings in conditions often beyond comprehension in our modern world.
Sometimes on the west coast you can get a good day. A lot of the old timers used to reckon it rained 364 days a year except in a leap year, and of course it was the extra day it rained.
Those days of hardship on the island's west coast have certainly captured the imagination of Lou Ray, a knowledgeable Tasmanian railway historian and prolific writer on the mining era.
To get round the west coast, even with today's transport, still causes a lot of problems. Of course, 150 years ago, without any good transport, it was virtually impossible.
Lou can now only reminisce about how it was when the sound of steam, stampers and shovels echoed through the hills around Zeehan. Mining is all but extinct here now. The hammer mills fell into silence just as quickly as they began. Where near vertical mountainsides once boasted massive rail haulages, just the scars of their existence remain. At the foot of the Hercules haulage, ore was loaded into wagons at the head of a 2-foot gauge rail line where it went to Zeehan for processing in the smelters. The North East Dundas Tramway was built by the Tasmanian government, with work beginning in 1895. It was just one of a myriad of railways and tramways meandering all over the west coast, but certainly one of the most spectacular. Lou Ray well recognises the vital role of railways during the mining boom. Without those winding ribbons of steel, it would have been impossible to get the excavated tonnage out to the rest of the world. This was the domain of narrow gauge railways, snaking their way through the hills and valleys where no other transport could reach. But rails alone were not enough. The trial of finding suitable engines was a long and painful one. Finally, after waiting 10 years for a loco which simply split the rails and fell in the dirt on its first run, a different kind of approach was needed to tackle this rough, mountainous country. Salvation began in 1909 when the Bayer Peacock Company built 2 locos for the North East Dundas Tramway, based on a radical new concept by Mr. H.W. Garratt. The dilemma of providing enough power on mountain railways had been pondered by this man for some time. His eventual design was effectively 2 locomotives in one, delivering power with manoeuvrability. From an idea to solve a local problem, a world-famous railway legend began with the birth of the original K1. Certainly the Garratts did not derive their success from beauty. Rather, an ugly duckling quality tended to endear them more to the railway enthusiast who had a better understanding of the locomotive's virtues. But with its bright green paint job and shining brass, the Bush Mills version has transformed the duckling into a swan. The rails of the tramway have all been pulled up, and only a few sleepers or the occasional cutting give evidence to the existence of this once active transport link. The old trackbed is 4-wheel drive territory now, with several creek crossings where timber bridges once stood. But even a 4-wheel drive has limits, so it's up to the ever-reliable Blundstones to traverse the last section. The reward is worth the effort. Although it may be a long time since passengers on picnic trains were enveloped by the spray of Montezuma Falls, much discussion goes on about plans to restore the line. There is a dream to once again burst out of the rainforest and see the tallest waterfall in southern Australia from a railway carriage. As Mother Nature begins consuming scars from the West Coast mining invasion, tourism is in fact a new local industry. With the natural beauty of its rivers and rainforests being a powerful drawcard, the whole island of Tasmania is a tourist target. As an ever-increasing number of people want to sample this remote wonderland, modern forms of transport are facing constant pressure to increase their payload. But it's the more traditional tourist route the Aussie duo have taken to England to sample some British way of life before their train-laden ship arrives. How easy it is to become absorbed in the grand old city of London, taking in all the architecture, the people and the history aboard one of the city's most popular venues in use today.
We've just about worked this crowd up into a coma now. Trick number 1. Trick number 2.
Street theatre is as old as the streets themselves, an ancient art in an ancient city.
Yes, well, I like them anyway. Take your photos now. Okay, bird impression. Number 1. The duck. Bird impression. Number 2. My favourite bird impression. Roast duck.
Today, the pavements of York in the north of the country support antics of the offbeat like Andy Dexterous, alongside slightly more cultured pursuits of curbside art. Watercolour renditions of the masters will hopefully attract a few pennies from appreciative passers-by before these works dissolve into obscurity. York has seen a lot of history, which reflects in its architecture. It's a wonderful experience wandering the narrow streets of this truly medieval city, contemplating names synonymous with its past. It's been in the hands of the Danes, Saxons and Normans. Even William the Conqueror made it a fortress. There's a contrast between the strength and the standards of these buildings. They may well have stood the test of time, but their construction also displays an extraordinary array of angles. Slopes of floors and curved walls are all perfectly described by the name for one of its more famous sections. The powerful influence of Christianity dominates the skyline in York. The Cathedral of St. Peter, or York Minster by popular title, has its origins as far back as the 12th century. Maybe the 40-odd parish churches then sprinkled around the area didn't share the same glory of size, but this modest little church does share historical significance by also dating back to the 12th century. For steam enthusiasts, there's a structure which, despite a modern intrusion on its surroundings, houses a veritable treasure trove of old goodies. In a city that became famous as a major transport centre, the National Rail Museum has the finest collection imaginable of railway products from the British steam era. Kept in immaculate condition, they range from the biggest and most powerful to the oldest and most famous. Although 25 years after the first recognised steam locomotive, Stephenson's rocket is generally associated with the beginning of railways. In 1829, it was the winner of a £500 prize to find the best-suited locomotive for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. This building also houses a locomotive of special interest to the touring Australians, for here is now the home of the original K1 Garratt. This may actually have been the first locomotive to travel across the ocean from Australia to England, but Alistair's 15-inch gauge replica is the first Australian-built loco to do so, and certainly the first in steam. At the Barking container base near London, somewhere in a sea of containers, a lonely locomotive waits to be claimed like a puppy at a lost dog's home.
Wrong spanner.
Don't tell me your shifter's not big enough to change. It'll have to stay in the container.
Back home.
British technology to the rescue.
English technology. That must be really interesting.
Whoa! Got a one of those bars.
Ravenglass is a small coastal village in the northwest of England, right opposite the Isle of Man. Here in the Lakes District of Cumbria, farming ground is as rich as it looks. past centuries, the quiet, unassuming river entrance of Ravenglass was one of the first ports established by the Romans. It lies at the bottom of a valley guarded by the infamous and rugged Hard Knot Pass. Today, the mountain is traversed by a thin, zigzagging road up a tortuous 1-in-3 gradient. The view commanded of the valley from near the top of this pass is reason enough for the Romans to have built a large fort here in the 1st century AD. The site was used to create a large garrison for reinforcing their military occupation of the area. There's enough structure remaining for the experts to have gained valuable information about the daily life of such early times. They even know for what purpose most of the buildings would have been used. But for the average visitor today, it's a tenuous link with a time outside their grasp. Another fort existed down at Ravenglass itself. A short walk out of town, the ruins of a bathhouse are all that remain of a once substantial structure established around 130 AD. Ravenglass also has one of the most picturesque little steam trains, threading its way up into the hills from the seaside village.
Because we've been very thirsty with these and these.
The many parallels that can be drawn between England and Australia even extend to this railway. The little visiting Garratt replica will actually be running on what was once a mining line with amazing similarities to the Northeast Dundas Tramway, home of the original Garratt in Australia. The interest in the Australian engine was mixed. Some were fascinated by the type of locomotive, some wanted to see the quality of engineering, and there were others who just wanted to see what this man from down under had brought halfway. Rich in history itself, the Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway, affectionately known around here as Lal Ratty, travels over ground sprinkled with evidence of Roman occupation from nearly 2,000 years ago. These days, resplendent scenery attracts people away from the turmoil of city living as they tour the Cumbrian Lakes district. Pubs in England are legendary, and one such establishment is a trademark of Ravenglass. It's actually a pub on a railway station, and with such an appropriate address, the Ratty Arms is definitely a focus of activity after a long day on the trains. Proudly, it stands on a platform beside the British Rail line, which services this coast, making it one of the better waiting rooms of any station. The now revered Ratty Arms started out as a conventional station building when Ravenglass was a busy junction with a mining line which ran a mere 7 miles up the valley to Dalegarth. Now it's a watering hole for the workers of the 15-inch gauge railway, where the newly arrived Australian locomotive is about to commence its tour of duty. The game of grown-up boys playing with their big train set is a serious one. Running a new engine isn't just a matter of hitching on some carriages and setting off. But it wasn't too long before the test train escaped the boundaries of the station yard. There's an intangibility about the attraction of steam, but somehow it manages to captivate young and old alike.
I mean, obviously they're fascinated by our steam engines, but whether they can relate to the fact that there used to be big steam engines running up and down on the railways, I don't know.
Trevor Stockton is one of the die-hard enthusiasts who's been coming here since he was a small boy. After driving steam engines here for 20 years full-time, Ravenglass still holds the magic that drew him in as a youngster.
Oh, my father brought me up here when I was a little lad. First started riding up and down on here when I was about 4 or 5, something like that. We came for our holidays every year, right through till when I was old enough to start coming up on my own, volunteering on the railway.
Around him is a railway with its own little community, a blend of employed staff working alongside a corps of volunteers. Guards, station masters, canteen staff, ticket sellers and cleaners, all returning here at any opportunity for year after year, giving their time to keep the Ratty rolling. So the little green engine from down under has now begun to tackle English rails. The next few weeks here will encompass much variety. The splendour of scenery at Ravenglass, magnificent machinery at Romney, the diverse history of both places, and of course plenty of wonderful characters who are the real heart of these railways.
More cheese. I don't know what to say. Yes. All the best. And thank you very much for what you've done for us.